Hey everybody, welcome. It's time for True Crime Wednesday. How are you? Hopefully everybody is enjoying a little bit of Indian summer, a little fall weather, and hopefully I actually had to break out my long sleeve shirt tonight, and I hope you're all having a great week. So we have quite a few things to talk about, and maybe a couple of cases that you weren't aware of or hadn't thought of in a while. So we're going to dive into a couple of things. There's not anything huge going on, so I am going to take a little bit of a departure into a case that somebody asked me to look into, which isn't exactly a criminal case, but we'll get into that later on. So, but I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of developments that have happened, especially around the Markel Adelson trial. Those of you who are not familiar with this case, it goes all the way back to 2014 when Professor Dan Markel, he was a Harvard-trained lawyer who was a law professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee, was gunned down in his driveway. And it took a couple of years before there was an arrest. Finally, there were arrests made. It was determined that it was a murder for hire type situation. And interestingly enough, the two gunmen who were responsible for the murder were tracked back to a woman who was an employee at the wife's family dental practice. So to back up a little bit, Dan Markel was married to Wendy Adelson. She also is a lawyer, and they met after law school, but they were both lawyers. And she was the daughter of a family of dentists. Her father was a dentist. One of her brothers is a dentist. The other one is a physician. And so she and Dan married. They had two boys. And after a few years of marriage, they divorced. Wendy initiated the divorce and determined that they were living in Tallahassee, Florida, which is a fair distance away from Miami, up in the northern part of the state. She didn't like Tallahassee. She'd grown up in the Miami area, and Tallahassee was kind of backwater in her opinion. And so she filed a motion with the court. She and Professor Adelson, or Professor Markel, had a custody arrangement where they shared their children about 50-50. And she wanted to change that so that she could move back to Miami with her children. And the judge denied her motion to allow her to do that and said she could move to Miami if she wanted, but she couldn't take the children. So she remained in Tallahassee, really against her will. Her family are a family that are very over-involved in one another's lives. And it came to everyone's attention that the woman who had arranged for the gunman was actually an employee at the dental office, and that's how the connection was made. She also, for a time, was the girlfriend of Wendy Adelson's brother, Charlie. So the two gunmen and Catherine Banowa, it's an interesting name, Catherine Banowa, were all convicted of the conspiracy to commit the murder and the murder. But the Adelson family had been left unscathed until Charlie Adelson, the brother, was arrested and accused of having arranged the murder. And there are a lot of phone calls that were wiretapped phone calls that indicate that there's a lot of indication that at least Wendy's mother was aware of what Charlie was arranging. So Charlie is going on trial. His trial starts the 28th of October, I believe. And from there, hopefully there may be some other indictments as well. One of the things that has happened, so we've been seeing a lot of the pretrial motions and things. There were motions in limine, meaning limiting, making pretrial determinations on evidence. There have been some discovery motions. The most interesting, though, is a motion to compel requiring the parents, excuse me, Wendy's parents, to submit to an interview with the prosecution. Florida has some very interesting discovery rules. Interesting in that they're a little bit out of the ordinary. One of their rules is that you can opt out of discovery. As a defendant, you have an obligation to share everything you turn up, as well as the prosecution having an obligation to provide the defense with everything. But the defense can opt out of that arrangement and not give the prosecution anything. But conversely, they don't get anything. So it's rare for the defense to opt out. One of the other things that is permitted is that they do depositions of in criminal cases, which not all states do. And they also allow, if a person is called in to be questioned in a case as a witness, they allow the police and the prosecution to give them immunity. So they have offered immunity to Donna and Harvey, the parents, in return for them coming in to testify or to be interviewed. Their attorney is declining, saying that they are both going to claim the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So one of the experts that I was watching said that doesn't make any sense because you don't need to claim the Fifth if you have immunity. So it'll be very interesting. The judge today signed an order saying that the Adelsons had to show up in court and prove why they won't go and participate in that interview. Well, probably they don't want to do that because they don't want to incriminate themselves and they don't want to end up being the target of a continued investigation. So that will be very interesting to see how that comes out. There are several YouTube providers who are covering that case sort of end to end, but it's super interesting. It's a case that sort of the two areas of my law practice sort of come together and that's that I did family and criminal defense. And so it's interesting from that standpoint. You would be amazed at the number of crimes that are committed over child custody. Let's not forget the Wagner family out of Piketon, Ohio, and the Pike County Massacre, where once again, very over-involved family very up in one another's business all the time. And the Wagner mom, Angela, was adamant that her son and her son's baby mama weren't getting along, and they really wanted the son's little girl with them all the time. And it finally resulted in the Wagner family being responsible for murdering 8 people within the baby mama's family, including baby mama, her current boyfriend, and a number of her relatives. So, and in that case, the father, Billy Wagner, is still awaiting trial. Everyone else has either pled guilty or been convicted. But it's a really interesting case, and yet another one where the motive was a child custody dispute. So the Markel Adelson case is going to be really interesting to keep watching, and it's really interesting for me because of some of these nuances about discovery and some of the other sorts of things that go on in the state of Florida that aren't typical. So that's a really interesting case to keep an eye on. You all know that Suzanne Morphew's Suzanne Morphew's remains were discovered about 35 miles from her home. There were other human remains found in the same area, so no one is really sure what's going on. We're just going to have to wait to see whether or not what the outcome of the autopsies are and whether or not there's enough to recharge her husband, Barry. You might recall he was charged. The prosecution, and this is a theme for today because we've got several cases where prosecutors are not playing fair. So in the Adelson case, in the Adelson-Markel case, we have prosecutors who've been somewhat hiding the ball, slow walking discovery. Now in the Morphew case, we had a instance where the prosecution absolutely refused to provide discovery to the point where the defense knew the discovery existed, went to the judge and said, we need all this discovery. And when the prosecution didn't provide it, the judge told them that since they had not provided it as they were supposed to, the judge was going to keep all of that information out. And that essentially imploded their case. So the prosecution had to dismiss the charges. Now, Barry Morphew has filed a civil case against the county and the prosecutor. So it'll be very interesting to see where that goes and whether or not they will at some point have enough evidence to prosecute him. It's not clear at this point whether or not there's anything more than some shaky circumstantial evidence that connects him to her murder. And there are a couple of issues that make people wonder. One is there was an unidentified male's DNA found in her car, and that person is a sex offender. So it's a little bit unclear where that prosecution goes or whether they will uncover enough to be able to prosecute Barry Morphew. Of course, we all know that the most likely candidate is always the husband, but it'll be interesting to see whether or not the state of Colorado can come up with enough evidence to make that happen. The other case where we are seeing at least a claim of prosecutorial misconduct is in the YNW Melly case. Melly was a rapper from Florida. Sorry, I'm a little raspy tonight. Melly was a rapper from Florida. He and his rap group were kind of on the verge of really breaking out. And he was accused of, he was in a car in which 2 of the 4 passengers were murdered. He claims it was a drive-by shooting. The prosecution claims that the shots came from the back seat and that he was responsible for the gunshots. that killed 2 of his bandmates and injured the 3rd. Now there is a big furor about some pretty substantial prosecutorial misconduct having to do with evidence and at least some cell phone evidence that was not turned over and is newly discovered. You might recall that Melly, the trial that happened a few months ago resulted in a hung jury. So the prosecution's been trying to figure out whether or not they're going to retry the case. At this point, they've been saying they were going to retry the case, but now the defense has uncovered a lot of information that the prosecution may have not wanted to come to light. So that'll be an interesting one to see. This week, we had an Amber Alert out for a little girl, 9 years old girl whose name is Charlotte Senna. And this was a case that had a happy ending. She was out camping with her family. She was riding her bicycle around a loop in the campground. She'd been playing with some other kids and wanted to take one last ride around this loop and before dinner. And when she was 10 minutes late or so, and parents realized she hadn't come back, they went looking for her right away, found her bicycle, called the police. She was missing for about 48 hours. While the family were still in the campground searching, there was a deputy stationed outside their home. And lo and behold, a guy came up at about 4 o'clock in the morning and dropped something in their mailbox. Now, there have been a lot of people by their house and around their house. There have been media around the house. So it wasn't immediately suspicious to the officer, but when they looked over the letter had a fingerprint and DNA that they connected to a fellow named Craig Ross. When they, the CERT team or the SWAT team, whatever they called it there, went in with the help of the FBI and state troopers. They discovered him in a trailer, and little Charlotte was in a closet, and they were able to recover her safely. There's we've heard online that Mr. Ross was accused of inappropriate activity with a child. There wasn't sufficient evidence, and that case was dismissed. They linked the fingerprint and the DNA to him from a DUI in the late 90s. So at this point, it has not been any allegation that there was any abuse. And it appears that the motive was ransom. The note that he put in the family's mailbox was a ransom note. So I did want to talk a little bit about Delphi. For those of you who are interested in the case, Bob Motta, M-O-T-T-A, does a YouTube channel called podcast called Defense Diaries, and he has covered the Delphi case fairly extensively. But something that I thought was interesting was that there is a report from the defense, and there is some additional information in some supplemental documents that were filed that indicate that they have found the college expert. If you recall early on, they said, the prosecution said, now law enforcement said, that they had consulted with a person who was an expert in these Norse religions, and that expert had said these are not Odinist cult related. Well, And when they asked the prosecution or the law enforcement, what's that professor's name? Oh, we don't remember, and we didn't write it down, and we can't find it. And well, the defense was able to turn up that expert, and they now say that that expert clearly told told law enforcement these are Odinistic runes. The placement of the sticks and the horn, the sticks that were put in like a horn, and the placement of these limbs that were across the bodies are definitively Odin runes. So now we have law enforcement lying and saying, we don't know who this expert is, and this person that we consulted said it's not related to Odin, and lo and behold, it is. So that just continues to cast doubt on what is going on with law enforcement in the Delphi case and what is going on with the prosecution in the Delphi case. Now, the defense doesn't have to do anything except cast reasonable doubt. And they certainly have been able to do it by saying there was all of this other information, and they are still asking for there to be a hearing on the issue of whether or not the initial warrant for Richard Allen's home was defective because law enforcement lied by withholding information from the judge. They say the judge would not have issued that warrant had it been, had the judge known that there were other alternative theories under investigation. So stay tuned for that, because that's going to be really interesting going forward. I'm anxious to see what that hearing is going to reveal. So, and I want to talk a little bit now about a couple of cases that you probably have not heard of, or maybe you have heard of, but haven't thought about in quite a while. The reason I want to talk about these two cases is they're both been in the news lately for a couple of different reasons, and they're related because they are both cases that involve Munchausen by proxy. So the mental disease, Munchausen by proxy, it's called something different in the new DSM, something more scientific sounding, and I didn't look it up to give you the official term, but we've always known it as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Now, Munchausen syndrome is when you injure yourself in order to get medical treatment or attention from the medical community. Munchausen by proxy is when a person does that to a child or to another vulnerable individual. So the one I want to talk about first is Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Now, this may sound familiar because there is I think it's a Netflix documentary about the case, and it is fascinating. So in 2015, Dee Dee Blanchard is found murdered in her home, in her bed, and her daughter, Gypsy Rose, is missing. So one of the things that we know about Gypsy Rose is that early in her life, her mother and father divorced, and her mother had sole custody of her. Her father had very little contact with her over the years. And Dee Dee Blanchard presented online and to the community that her daughter, Gypsy Rose, was very ill, that she had a number of physical ailments. She had muscular dystrophy. I think that she was limited to a wheelchair, that she was intellectually challenged and had the intellectual capacity of about a 7-year-old, that she needed At one point, Dee Dee said that she had cancer. And so there was this, and Dee Dee was reaping the benefits of lots of donations. They had a Habitat for Humanity house. They received lots and lots of donations, monetary donations. She was always taking advantage of charitable organizations as well as government organizations that supported them. And she had a whole closet of medications and collections of prescription medications for this child. And the girl was in a wheelchair. According to Dee Dee Blanchard, Gypsy was about 12 or 13. In reality, she was in her 20s, but her mother had been doing this since she was very young. And one of the ways that, so Dee Dee Blanchard had Gypsy convinced that she was sick all the time. She was giving her all sorts of medications. She was taking her to the doctor and subjecting her to all sorts of medical procedures, surgeries, all sorts of diagnostic procedures, and all in the name of her being ill and needing all these. And Dee Dee was sort of notorious for doctor shopping and for moving Gypsy around from doctor to doctor. When she didn't get satisfaction or a doctor got suspicious, they'd move on to the next doctor. Remember that, because that is going to be relevant in the next case we're going to talk about. So there was a lot of, there were several doctors that were suspicious that this was a case of Munchausen by proxy, but they were never able to pin it down definitively and pin Dee Dee down long enough in order to be able to make those diagnoses. So in early 2015, Gypsy Rose stole a laptop. She got her hands on a laptop. Actually, she stole money from her mother and bought a laptop. And she was able to access the internet. And so she started getting a little bit wise to what her mother was doing, that clearly she could walk. She could, she wasn't developmentally delayed. She was an adult woman at that point. She began an online relationship with a guy who lived a few hours away, and they began trying to figure out how they were going to be together, with Gypsy's mom not wanting to permit Gypsy to be an adult woman and have a relationship. And so they tried to meet. He came to town. They went to the movies. Dee Dee allowed that to happen. But once she met the young man, then she was like, no, that's not going to happen anymore. Over time, oh, good. Somebody in the chat just said, Munchausen is now referred to as factitious disorder imposed on self or other. Factitious disorder. I don't know. Munchausen just sounds more interesting, doesn't it? Anyway, so they continued to try and figure out how to be together, and determined in short order that Dee Dee was never going to permit that, because Gypsy was her meal ticket. Without Gypsy, there was no donations. There was no GoFundMe. There was no Habitat for Humanity house. There was no gravy train without her continuing to be a sick young girl. And Dee Dee had enough of it. She gave ample testimony after the fact about the abuse that her mother subjected her to. Dee Dee would often tie her into her bed and starve her to keep her small, didn't feed her. There was a lot of abuse going on, and it had been going on all of Gypsy's life. So the two young people finally discover that the only way they're ever going to be together, and the only way that Gypsy is ever going to get shut of her mother, is if her mother is dead. And so the young man who she's involved with, who is somewhat diminished capacity himself, he's of normal, but on the low end of normal IQ and on the autism spectrum. And he comes to, he gets a bus ticket, he rides the bus, and he comes to town, and he stabs Gypsy's mother to death. They both then get on the bus and go back to his hometown, and she's there with him when police track her down. So they're both arrested. Gypsy testifies against the boyfriend, and because of the years of abuse and because of her cooperation, she ends up with 10 years in prison. He, on the other hand, ends up with life in prison, but he does have the possibility of parole. The other issue is that, and they were both adults at that point, they were not teenagers. So it was announced that Gypsy Rose Blanchard is going to be released on parole in December of this year, having served 8 years of a 10-year sentence. And that is not unusual. 8 years of a 10-year sentence makes a bit of sense if because inmates get time for good behavior. She has been very cooperative, and so she is going to be paroled. Now, she is, I mean, she's an incredibly damaged young woman, and I hope that there are support systems in place that are going to support her for some extended period of time, because she's someone who suffered abuse and neglect for years upon years while her mother used her as a golden ticket. And so I hope that she is going to have a support system that's going to come alongside her and be able to help her transition back into society. From the documentary, it appears that her father and stepmother are quite supportive, that they were visiting her in prison, that her father felt like he could have done more to protect her, and that they have been available and accessible to her. So I'm hoping that she's going to have that kind of support. So, and then the last case that I want to talk about is the subject of a documentary called Take Care of Maya. It is on Netflix right now. And the reason why it is of interest to a lot of folks is because there is a civil trial going on right now having to do with Maya. Now, those of you who follow me know that for a pretty substantial period of my legal career, I was involved in representing both parents and children in child welfare cases. And so I have a lot of experience having to do with kids that have been removed from homes because of abuse or neglect. And so this case is sort of interesting to me for several reasons. Once again, it's out of the state of Florida, and Florida has some interesting laws when it comes to child welfare cases. And but here is the story. In 2015, again, right around the time that the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case started, in 2015, Maya is living with her mother, whose name is Beata. She's a Polish immigrant who is an RN, and that information is important. And she is, there's just some really interesting things about this case. They're a normal, she has a younger brother. They're kind of an ordinary family. Dad is a firefighter. Mom is a nurse. The kids are going to school. And Maya becomes ill. And it starts out as a stomach ache, and it starts out as some pain in her joints, and it quickly progresses to the point where she is wheelchair ridden. Her feet are turning in, and she is in constant excruciating pain. As a parent probably would, they take Maya to several different doctors. Over this period of time, they're going from doctor to doctor. Sounds like a red flag for Munchausen by proxy. But and they're going from doctor to doctor because they can't figure out what's wrong with this child. And she is in horrible pain, and she is getting worse. So as her mother, who is a nurse, does research, she discovers a doctor and discovers what is a potential diagnosis, and it is called complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS. So they find this doctor who is a specialist in this condition, and they go to him, and he, in fact, diagnoses her with CRPS, and he talks to them about what is the most common treatment for CRPS. And the most common treatment for CRPS is the use of ketamine. Now, ketamine is often used as a recreational drug. It is often abused. It is one of the drugs that contributed to Michael Jackson's death. And it is often a very, very high potency painkiller. It's a hallucinogenic if taken in large doses, which is why it has become sort of a popular drug to abuse. So the doctor starts Maya out on a protocol of ketamine in lower doses, and it is not effective. But he tells the family that there is a treatment. It is a controversial treatment, and it is not done in the United States. And it is where you put the patient into a coma caused by ketamine. And it's thought that while the patient is in a ketamine coma, that the brain rewires or helps is helped in its rewiring, so that the body is not sensing pain at the levels that this syndrome causes. It is one of those conditions where the brain receives a pain message, and instead of allowing that pain message to wane the way it normally would if you bump your elbow, or the pain is going to go away, you kind of rub it, and and the brain stops, the injured nerve stops sending a pain notification to the brain. Well, in people with this condition, instead of the brain stopping sending, or the nerve stopping sending that message to the brain, those pain messages just get more and more intense. So anytime there's any kind of an injury or a stimulation to a nerve, the nerve reads that as excruciating intense pain, and that's the message that gets sent to the brain. So the idea of the ketamine coma is to intercept that and to disrupt that cycle of pain messages of increasing intensity. So the parents very reluctantly take Maya to Mexico. Her own American doctor is involved in the treatment. She goes to Mexico. She's in a ketamine-induced coma for about 5 or 6 days. They bring her out of the coma, and you know, the documentary is a little hard to watch. The little girl is coming out of all these drugs, and she's confused and has had some hallucinations, and so, but within a week or two, she is so much better. She has regained her flexibility. She is able to put weight on her legs. She is starting to move around, and she's clearly is much improved. And she pretty much goes into remission for about a year. And about a year later, she has this horrible relapse, and her father is home with her. Her mother is at work. And so her father calls her mother and says, you know, she's in horrible pain. I have to take her to the ER. So the mother says, okay, I'll meet you there. And the family, off she goes to the ER. It's in the middle of a hurricane, for God's sakes. So they get to the emergency room, and when they explain to the ER people the treatment, that what she's diagnosed with, nobody knows what it is. And when they explain that she's been treated with large doses of ketamine, that immediately sends red flags up for all of the ER personnel. So they all are highly concerned that something is not right here, because this is not a typical treatment that you would treat a young 10 or 11-year-old child with these large doses of ketamine. Nonetheless, so because they are all mandatory reporters, they report a potential for child abuse and a potential for Munchausen by proxy to the local officials. Now, there's an interesting twist in Florida, which from my standpoint, legally is important. And that is that the child welfare investigative agencies have been privatized and outsourced. So the doctor who comes to assess Maya works for a private company. She does not work for the state. And she shows up, and she does a very quick assessment. And based on that assessment, she decides that the child is being abused through medical neglect, through Munchausen by proxy, and reports that to the child welfare authorities. Now, Maya's physician, who has been the person who's been treating her for the last year, gets in touch with this doctor and says, here's Maya's condition. Here is all of her treatment records. Here's what we've been doing for treatment. And the most effective treatment for her has been large doses of ketamine. And the doctor absolutely ignores that. So ignores any confirmation from of what the parents have been telling them, and ignores it completely. It's reported to child welfare. Child welfare then files an action against the parents, taking wardship over Maya, and they go to a shelter hearing. The doctor shows up at the shelter hearing and gives her opinion about whether or not Maya is being subjected to abuse. and both parents are banned from seeing her. She's in the hospital. They can't see her. The mom can't talk to her. It's weeks before they finally establish that she can talk. They can talk if they're supervised. They can talk over the phone. Dad can visit, but only if he's supervised. And so they have a couple of different hearings. At one point during a proceeding, the mom's attorney says, and mom's a nurse, she has been researching, and the other thing is, I think, a little cultural. She is a Polish immigrant, and I'm here to tell you, if you know people who are of European descent, particularly the Slavic countries, they are incredibly direct. They are very point blank direct. Their language is very direct. One of my favorite examples is we had our lovely German exchange student who lived with us for a year. And I would say to the girls, would you mind bringing me your laundry, or would you mind doing a chore? And the first couple of times I did that, and my daughter went right to do whatever the chore was. And my German daughter said, well, she asked if we minded, and I don't want to do it, so I didn't do it. And my daughter had to explain, no, it doesn't, just because she asked if we'd mind, it doesn't really mean that you have an option. So that is the sort of, I think, a little bit of a cultural piece to it, because Beata came to the United States as an older teenager. I think she was 17 or 18. And so, I think that she was a very direct person. Lots of people in the video will say she was very direct about what she wanted. And I think that there were a lot of people who took that as very demanding. Well, she was a mom, she was a nurse, and she was doing her very best to figure out what was wrong with her child and get her the appropriate treatment. So she got sideways very quickly with the hospital staff because she was demanding. And so the LA, I do see your comment, and that's where I'm going with this. So I'll get back to what's going on now. So the next thing that happens is they go to court. Her attorney, Beata's attorney, says to the judge, can my client give her daughter a hug, please? And the judge says, no, she can't. And that was so devastating for Beata. She had been, this had been going on for months. She had been trying so hard. The phone calls are heartbreaking, where she's talking to her daughter and saying, we just have to be patient. And the little girl's saying, but mommy, I need you. I miss you. I don't feel good. And the mom is just, you can tell she's just devastated. And yet she can't, all she can do, she's monitored. She can't say anything other than hang in there, be patient, be strong. And so she gets home. Trigger warning, guys, this is hard to hear. She gets home from that court appearance. She says she has a migraine headache. She goes to her room. The dad and the son leave, come back, go to, I don't remember, but they later on that evening, they discover that she has committed suicide. And left a note saying, take care of Maya. It's absolutely horrible. And this was a mom who was absolutely to the end of her rope, and feeling so incredibly helpless, knowing that this child has this medical condition and that she is not able to get her child the treatment that she needs. The girl remains in the hospital for quite some time. Funnily enough, even though the hospital doctors are saying they aren't even sure she has CRPS, and they dispute it and are attributing her illnesses to Munchausen's, all of the hospital billing comes back. She's being treated for CRPS. So she is finally released from the hospital. The court finally dismisses the juvenile dependency case, the child welfare case. And she is now, I don't know whether she's 18, she's a young adult. And her family initially sued the, this gets kind of convoluted, sued the organization the doctor worked for. It was called Sunborn or something. And it was a privatized organization that did all of the child abuse investigations. They sued that organization and won $5 million. So there's already a precedent for what happened. Now they have sued Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital for the misdiagnosis and the reports of Munchausen by proxy and all of those things. That case, that civil case, is underway right now. And so a lot of the channels that cover court proceedings have been covering it. So I think it's on Law and Crime. And it is a really interesting case because if you watch the documentary, they have a lot of evidence against the Children's Hospital. So I bring these two cases up because it's in an interesting way to contrast. Clearly with Gypsy Rose Blanchard, we had a mother who was committing abuse. She was abusing her child by abusing the medical system, by subjecting her to several very invasive, she had surgery, for heaven's sakes, very invasive procedures and medical treatments for medical conditions she didn't have. So on one hand, we have that. On the other hand, we have a mom who is so determined to get the appropriate treatment for her child that it's mischaracterized as Munchausen. So I had a case during my time practicing, and it was a difficult case all the way around. It was difficult for several different reasons. One was that I was assigned to the case and represented the mother in the case because she had several young children, and the youngest of her children was an infant, under a year old. And the children all got sick with a virus. RSV or a virus. And the baby wasn't doing well. And she took the baby to the emergency room. The baby was very underweight, and they immediately flagged this baby as failure to thrive. Well, the first thing that happens when you have a baby that is failing to thrive is they look at, what's going on in the home. Is the baby getting proper care? Perfectly reasonable question. Well, the mother insisted this baby is getting proper care. And the family, but there was another wrinkle to this family, and that was that mom had a known issue with methamphetamine. This is what's really set everybody off. The fact that she had and continued to have a problem with methamphetamine. And that the living conditions they were living in weren't great. I mean, they weren't abysmal, they weren't filthy, but the living conditions were pretty modest, to say the least. And there were 4 young children and 1 older daughter who was like almost an adult. So these 4 little children, if you looked at all of them lined up, they were all tiny little children. Mom herself probably weighed about 80 pounds. She was not very tall and extremely slight. And she kept saying to me, Lori, I feed my kids, and they're going after me because of my meth habit, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether or not I'm taking care of my kids, and I'm taking care of my kids. And as we tracked through this case, I will say that the medical records that we got from the hospital and from the emergency room were all pretty damning. And it wasn't until we weren't satisfied with the results that we asked for the children to be evaluated by a different medical provider. And that medical provider said, I can't rule out a genetic metabolism disorder, metabolic disorder. That was the word I was looking for. And when they did all of the increased testing, we found out, in fact, that all 4 of her younger children who had the same mom and the same dad had the same genetic metabolic condition, and mom had it. And that was the reason she was such a tiny little person. And all of those children were tiny little people because of this metabolic condition. And, but it was a really tough case because we had a mom who, just like Maya's mom, was insistent, I am taking proper care of my case and my kids, and I am pursuing medical treatment for them when I think it's required. And instead of being recognized as having had her children's best interest at heart, the medical community said, you must be doing something untoward, and you must have caused your child's medical condition. So it is a really tough distinction. It will be very interesting to see what the outcome is of the suit that's going on right now on behalf of Maya and her family. And I don't think there are clear-cut answers. I am deeply concerned anytime we are privatizing law enforcement. And we see this happening in a lot of jurisdictions. Now, in my home state in Oregon, we have what's called the Kids Center, where I was from, in the Portland area. It's called the CARES unit. They are units that are staffed by mental health professionals, trained mental health professionals, and medical professionals to do the initial interviews, not investigation. So if there is a suspicion that a child has been abused, they would go to an appointment at the Kids Center. They would have a physical examination. They would have an interview with a mental health interviewer, and then that information would be turned over to law enforcement. That is very different than what's been going on in Florida, where they're literally privatizing the investigation. So I think that part's a little troubling. So these are really interesting questions, interesting cases, and I encourage you to watch the Netflix documentary if you have access to that. It's called Take Care of Maya. And I think they do a good job of laying out the series of events and what happened. They interview the doctors who made the diagnosis and who initiated the ketamine treatment. And there are some really nice, really great interviews with both Maya and her brother that I think are really enlightening. And I think I think that it's worth taking a look at. It's not I think any time that we are dealing with child abuse, those are not clear-cut determinations. We're dealing with people who may or may not be very reliable reporters, depending on their age. Now, in Maya's case, she was a pretty reliable reporter. She was pretty up on what was going on. She'd been pretty well versed on her treatment. And so I found her, there's a lot of videos when Mom was trying to figure out what was going on with Maya. She often videotaped the doctor visit. So there's a lot of videos of Maya at that age, and she seems pretty savvy and pretty interested in what's going on with her. So, but child abuse is tough because oftentimes you have young kids who are not very reliable reporters, and you have family dynamics where you don't know what to believe. So, I think Maya's family were pretty mainstream, middle of the road kind of family. They were very believable. They were not criminals. They were not drug addicts. They were not. And so it was, they sort of were the model family to test this, I guess. But it's destroyed their lives. Simply for trying to get treatment for their child. So very interesting cases. And looking into the case of Maya Kowalski came because somebody asked me to. So if you have a case that you would like me to take a look at, I would love to hear that. I'm always open to new suggestions. I'm very interested in the Adelson Markel case. Those of you who may have seen me on Surviving the Survivor with Joel Waldman a week or so ago, we talked about that, and I'm very interested in it. Joel has invited me to come down and cover some of the trial, and I'm thinking about it seriously. Kind of depends on how much progress I'm making on my book. It's going well, but there's still a lot to be done in that regard, and I really would like to meet my deadline of the end of the year. So kind of waiting to see how that all comes together. But I would like to, I would very much like to go down and sit in on some of the trial and meet some of the folks that are involved in that case, because it is a case that continues to interest me, and it might be another book. I don't know. So I guess we're ready to take some questions. I did see a comment in there. The Kowalski family, Maya's family, is suing Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital for $500 million. So some of the proceedings that have been going on recently had to do with whether or not they could continue to ask for punitive damages. And there's just a lot of those interim decisions that have to be made. So, but I think we're ready for questions. I'll get a slug of water here. Maybe my voice will be a little less gravelly. Kavita Diva. Question. I've heard of microdosing ketamine. I'm so curious. When has ketamine become a drug that is used in such huge amounts for comas? So y'all know I'm not a medical expert. And so my understanding is that they started out with microdosing Maya with ketamine, and it was not effective. And so this treatment that is something experimental and available in Mexico calls for using ketamine to put a person into an induced coma. Now, we in hospitals use drugs to put people into induced comas, often when they have brain injuries that need to have time to heal. So it's not all that unusual. A medically induced coma is a treatment modality within the medical community. The idea of putting someone into a medically induced coma for the purpose of treating CRPS is the part that is somewhat controversial. So I think we are learning. For example, in the case of peyote and other hallucinogenics, we are learning that they can be used effectively in mental health treatment. And we are learning, and maybe old Timothy Leary wasn't that wrong. We are learning that hallucinogenics can, when they are used properly and properly supervised, can assist in some really intractable mental health conditions. For example, people who have chronic and debilitating depression, people who have PTSD, have complex PTSD, they're discovering that those treatments can be effective when they are used responsibly and under medical supervision. And I think we're seeing this same development with the use of ketamine. So, like I say, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I couldn't do the math, but it has been an emerging area within medicine, using hallucinogenic sorts of drugs for the treatment of certain conditions. So, question then. Do you blame Gypsy Blanchard for killing her mom? I don't. Her mother forced her to believe she was deathly ill and in surgery her whole life. This one's tough. We have a child who felt helpless and had been systematically abused for her whole life. Still, I believe Gypsy knew murdering her mother was wrong. And the legal test is, does that person have the ability to conform their behavior to the law? I think Gypsy knew that what they were doing was wrong. Just like she knew that stealing the knife from Walmart was wrong, stealing money from her mother was wrong. She knew those things were wrong. Was she justified? Legally, no. But I do believe that the reason why her sentence was so much less was that the court took into consideration the lifetime of abuse that she had suffered. The lifetime, not only of physical abuse, but emotional abuse as well. The emotional abuse of being told over and over and over again, you're sick, you're not well, you can't walk. I mean, she shaved her head. You can't have hair because of your illness. You're going to die soon. All of those messages were constantly being sent to her. That is an incredible emotional abuse. So I believe that the court, the reason her sentence was as light as it was. I mean, a 10-year sentence and serving 8 of it for a murder charge is nearly unheard of. So I do believe that that her sentencing reflected the fact that she was subjected to such terrible abuse. But I have to come down on the side of saying that she knew that what she was doing was wrong. Maybe she felt like it was the only alternative. Maybe she felt like it was the only way to escape. But I'm not even sure that that is true. Because I think that Gypsy had the intellectual ability to think through those things and to figure those things out. So I think she knew it was wrong, and I think that they talked about, if you watch the documentary and some of the video footage of her in jail, they talked about a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, about trying to run away together. They talked about her trying to get pregnant because they thought that the mother would have to allow the boyfriend to be part of her life. I mean, they talked about other alternatives and options other than murdering her, and ultimately decided that having the boyfriend kill the mother was the best route. Gypsy stayed in the other room while the boyfriend went into the bedroom and stabbed her to death. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was terrible all the way around. Yeah. Oh, hi, Victoria. Hi, Victoria. We need to do lunch soon. What was Mom getting out of it? Well, Mom was getting a number of things. Mom was seen as her savior, as her protector. She was seen as, this mom, she's been through so much, and she's so brave, and she's so courageous, and she's so devoted to this child who has all of these health issues. And so Mom is a hero, and gets her sort of played into the hero mode. And she also gets money. She didn't have to work. She was on disability. She was getting disability for Gypsy. She was getting and there were, I mean, she was getting money from all these charitable organizations, and there were all kinds of fundraisers, GoFundMes happening everywhere to raise money for her, because she was so she couldn't work because she had to stay home and take care of Gypsy. So yeah, that's what Mom got out of it. Hi, LA. Is parenting style on trial, Ray Ferreton, and or I think the jury will have a problem coming to a decision about this one. Are you talking about, first of all, I'm not sure what Ferreton is. And are you talking about Maya? I don't know. I don't know that they're going to have a problem coming to a decision. They may not get the kind of damages they want, but let's remember that they've already sued and settled with the privatized child abuse investigation organization. And they settled that for somewhere around $5 million. They sued that doctor and that clinic, and were, I'm not familiar with Timothy Ferreton, so I'll look at that. I'll check that one out, and I'll have something for you next week, because that's not one I'm familiar with. But if it's related, then sure, I'll take a look at it, and we can talk about how it relates to these other two cases. Munchausen by proxy is not common, but it happens. And so, we used to think that it was I think more rare than it really is. So, but I will look into that. Timothy Ferriton. I'm making a note as we speak. And I think our next question is about Delphi. Oh, question not so much. Good Lori, thank you for helping me feel sane. Oh, thanks. You guys all help me feel sane too. So it's a mutual sanity society. Hi, Squeaky Wheel. Delphi investigation, total cluster F. On the part of law enforcement. Perp was right there for 6 years. How can they win? Will law enforcement ever be held accountable for the incompetence? You know, this is tough. We don't know enough yet to know whether the person who the defense says they ought to be looking at is the right person. But we do know that if that person is the right person, they've had 6 years to cover their tracks. And that is unfortunate. And it is unfortunate. We don't know enough, but it's hard not to jump to the conclusion that law enforcement, that this was intentional. It wasn't just sloppy. When we look at the fact that some of the prison guards were wearing Odin patches and took them off after the defense noticed it. When we look at the fact that there are in some prisons, this Odinist religion is recognized as a religious practice. I mean, it certainly is more concerning than just a defense tilting at windmills and trying to bring up woo-woo stuff as a way to get their client out of jail or out of the charges. It just seems that there's more substance to this. I mean, you can chew on this. It's not just, we're going to raise everything we can. We're going to throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. I don't get the sense in reading all 136 pages of that motion that that was what the defense is attempting to do. And I find it really troubling that law enforcement said when this theory was floated by the defense, what about this Odinist group? Law enforcement said, oh, no. We consulted with this professor and who's a specialist in this area. And the professor told us this didn't have anything to do with this Odin cult. When the defense, rightfully so, said, who was that? Who was that professor? And we'd love to see his report. And we'd really like to know when this conversation took place and what that professor's qualifications are. And law enforcement suddenly said, can't remember, forgot, dog ate my homework. I mean, you know, that's kind of mortifying. And then to have the defense be able to turn up that professor who says that is exactly the opposite of what I told law enforcement. What I told law enforcement was these symbols that are at this crime scene are absolutely Odinist related. They are Viking runes. They absolutely are related to that religion. So interesting, because now we have somebody who's literally saying the police didn't just forget to tell the judge about this. They outright lied. They knew that this professor had said these symbols connect to this cult. And yet they went off in a completely different direction and went after Richard Allen. You know, Richard Allen's attorneys claim that he's been the subject of abuse and harassment and threats while he's been in jail. The reason why his health has deteriorated is because of the the terrible abuse he's taken in jail, and that is at the hands of both members, inmate members of the cult, as well as prison guards. And prison guards can look the other way when these things happen for the right inducement. And protecting their brother Odinus might be the right inducement. So I think it's very concerning. I find it very disturbing. And I think that we are seeing this in so many cases. You know, if you see misconduct in one case and you think, okay, that's an outlier, that's, you know, that's a bad apple. But we're looking at Delphi, we're looking at Adelson, we're looking at Morphew, we're looking at every one of these cases where prosecutors and law enforcement are literally hiding the ball. And that is so goes against our system. That's not the legal system that I love and defend. That's not the legal system that it is the whole reason why we need defense attorneys who are willing to stand up and say, wait a minute, something smells here. Something stinks. Whether it's the prosecutor not turning over discovery until the last minute, as in Vallow and as in Morphew, or whether it's law enforcement literally falsifying evidence. It is a problem in our system, and I don't know why. It is like a cancer in our system. If it were just one case, you could step back and say, well, you know, bad apples. But that's not what's going on here, because we are looking at case after case after case after case where this is the case. There's another case which is on my list to talk about, but which I didn't really have the time to delve into as deeply as I wanted to, and that's Karen Reed. She's accused of having murdered a police officer. She claims that he went into a party, he was kind of sideways with some of his brother officers and in a dispute with them, and he got the crap kicked out of him, staggered out of the house, fell in the snow, and died. Who's to be believed? That's a tough case, because anytime that you have law enforcement who has all the power controlling the investigation, anytime you have law enforcement who has an axe to grind or has a vested interest in the outcome of the case, that's a problem. So, and these high profile cases, who doesn't have a dog in the fight? Whether it's the prosecutor trying to build their reputation or whether it's law enforcement trying to protect a fellow officer, who doesn't have a dog in the fight in these big, high intensity, high visibility cases? So we don't have any word on whether Brian Kohberger there are going to be cameras in the courtroom, but I suspect there are not, because the prosecution has joined the defense in saying they don't want cameras in the courtroom. So that's another piece. And I think we're going to continue to see these cases where we have real misgivings about whether or not the system is doing its best to protect the rights of the defendant. And I think we have some real questions about how power and money work when it comes to Adelson and Markel. I think we have some real questions about why law enforcement were so adamant that they needed to go after Barry Morphew without the appropriate amount of information, why the prosecution didn't turn over what they were required to turn over. Those are all huge questions that we ask every week, every Wednesday, when we look at these cases. So I appreciate so much you guys all being here to help me ask those questions. Hi, Citizen Jane. Are members of the prosecution also members of the cult? I don't think we know. I mean, we don't know one way or the other. We don't have any information that indicates anybody other than the prison guards are involved, but we don't know for sure. We do know that this is a cult that permeates prisons, and that we do know that the prison guards in the prison where Richard Allen is being held were wearing Odin patches. So beyond that, we don't know. I think it's an excellent question, and I think that it certainly bears some investigation to find out how deep these believers go. They're trying to pass it off as, oh, it's just a group of, you know, weirdos in the next town who get together and do these druid, or not druid, Viking Odin ceremonies. It doesn't sound to me like it's limited to that, but that's what they're trying to say at this point. Is it doesn't go into polite society. This is just a weird offshoot group. So I don't think we know yet, but I hope we're going to find out. At a minimum, we know that there are some law enforcement folks around. Richard Allen went on his own hunger strike, I thought, after his imprisonment. You know, I don't know for sure, but I do know that his attorneys didn't bring that up in their motion, but his attorneys claim that they deny him food, that, you know, which is a common tactic, you know, is they take everything off their plate and they don't have any food. And, you know, it's a common punishment for minor infractions in the jail, that other inmates take your food and you're not allowed to eat. And I mean, it's hazing and it's punishment. So I don't really know. I mean, it's possible he went on a hunger strike, but it's also possible that the folks who he was in jail with were harassing and punishing him. And, you know, his attorney's position is that they were set on getting him to confess and set on getting him to admit and plead guilty. So, which he did confess. So there's a lot more to be determined in that one. Crash D. How do prosecutors and attorneys prove Munchausen by proxy? This is a good question. One of the ways that they often do it is to allow the person who they believe is the perpetrator contact with the victim, and they put cameras in the rooms. I've seen some just chilling video of moms who are abusing their children because of Munchausen by proxy, who are injuring their children when no one's looking. There's some really chilling footage out there of a child in the hospital, and the mom kept saying the child stopped breathing. And they put a camera in the room, and mom was literally putting a pillow over the kid's head until it stopped breathing, and then giving the child CPR and resuscitating her. So usually it's done by that kind of surveillance, and you know, making sure that the medical personnel know exactly the kind of treatment the child's getting. So if something untoward pops up, they know that it came from the abuser. But mostly it's done with surveillance cameras. Hi, Kathy Crosby. What is Odin? Never heard of it. It is a Norse Viking religion practiced by people in the Scandinavian countries. It is a cult where they have many gods. It's a pantheistic and very nature-based kind of religion, if you want to call it that. and they do a lot of ceremonies, and there are a lot of symbols and what they call runes, symbols, that they use in their ceremonies to reflect back to the gods. So it's a Norse sect. And if you've ever watched any of the series, The Vikings, they practice a form of that. It's a very pagan kind of religion. Richard Allen, blood was drained from bodies in river. And if Richard Allen, how could he have done that? Not possible, in my opinion. Yeah, so there are a lot of inconsistencies about the scene, the crime scene. You know, the first real insight we've gotten into the crime scene, because law enforcement has kept the whole crime scene very, very close to their chest. The first real insight we have gotten into the crime scene is that 136-page motion that the defense filed, and they kind of blew the lid off of that, off of what happened at the crime scene. Before that, we had been told, the public had been told, that there were features of the crime scene that were concerning or were unusual, and that made them think a particular way about the crime. But let's face it, they got fixated on the fact that they found an unspent bullet between the bodies. That unspent bullet could have been entirely coincidental. And as we've talked about before, while law enforcement is saying that bullet ran through the action of Richard Allen's gun, the technology around ejector marks is junk science. It is nowhere near as definitive as law enforcement is trying to make it seem. So it could very well be that finding of that gun, that unspent bullet, was entirely coincidental to the murder. And it could very well be that, yes, that bullet was run through a similar gun to the one that Richard Allen owns. However, it doesn't have to be that particular gun, because ejector mark comparisons are nowhere near as definitive as comparisons of bullets that come out of the barrel of a gun. Ejector marks, every gun, thousands of guns are manufactured all in the same way. Now, you're not going to tell me that the ejector mark on that particular ejector mechanism is so unique that it could only have run that bullet through the works of that gun. Now, it is different when you're talking about a bullet that has been fired through the barrel of a gun, because every time a bullet fires through a rifle, the explosiveness of that impacts what the inside of that rifle, that barrel, looks like. And so every time a bullet is fired, it is etching the inside of that barrel. That is so different than the ejector mechanism in the gun. So right now they have said what the thing that links him is that bullet. If they get the warrant thrown out because of the lies that were told to the judge to get the warrant, the connection between that bullet and that gun goes away, and Richard Allen walks, because that's how tenuous their connection is. And boy, if I were the defense, I would be dragging in every bullet expert I could find, just in case that warrant doesn't get thrown out, because I don't think that there's that much of a case for Richard Allen, other than the fact that he owned clothes similar to the clothes that were seen on the bridge guy. We don't know that Richard Allen wasn't the bridge guy, because what we know is that one of the girls caught images on her phone. We know that she caught a voice, and we know that there is some video that hasn't been released to the public. We don't know what's on that video, so we don't know for sure. But there is a very persuasive argument to be made by the defense that taking two young, healthy teenagers across a river that was somewhere around 3 feet deep to the other side of the river would be more than a single person could manage. And then keeping one under control while you murder the other one. I mean, you know, we know it could happen. It happened in Moscow, but they were contained in separate rooms. But, you know, two young, healthy women, young teenagers, it's a lot to think about. And there is indication, that's what the defense motion talks about. There is indication that the actual killing may have been done someplace else, and the bodies may have been staged where they were found. So LA, I agree that there are some very serious evidentiary questions about this case, whether it's the bullet, whether it's the logistics of how you do it, whether it's the professor who said, yes, these are Odinist symbols. There's a lot of big questions, and it does make you wonder what is going on in our country, where we have law enforcement, our law enforcement organizations using these kind of tactics in these high visibility cases. Is it that they don't want to lose? I don't know. But, you know, we keep getting these red flags flying about the way that our law enforcement, whether it's prosecutors or whether it's cops, are behaving, that should be concerning to every citizen. Because if they can treat that defendant that way, then who looks after my rights? Who protects me? The law is meant to protect all of us, the guilty and the innocent. But if we don't protect the guilty, the rights of the potentially guilty, then we don't protect the rights of the innocent either. So these are all really good questions, and I don't have answers for them yet, but I'm intrigued by what it is going on in our society that is that is causing these disconnects. Hi, Trisha the trucker. Or Odin is the Norwegian Zeus, basically. Right. Right. So there are a lot of different cultures who have a pantheon of gods, whether it's Greeks or Romans or Norse, Norwegian, and basically they have many gods, and Odin is in their faith the leader god. So but it is similar in that it's sort of nature based, very much about outdoors and gods who control the elements and those sort of ideas. Trisha, I hope you're doing well. Let us know where you are tonight. And a couple things I wanted to remind everybody. I am going to be working to do the raffle for our True Crime Quilt Guild quilt, which is on the wall behind me. I did a little rearranging, so my background wasn't a bare wall. And so we're going to be working on that. And don't forget, for those of you who are interested, we are hoping very much to launch pre-sales for the Valo Daybell book, Children of Darkness and Light, at CrimeCon in Nashville at the end of May of next year. So any of you who are looking forward and trying to make some plans for vacation for next year, keep that on the back burner, because it's going to be a fun time. And I'd love to see you all there. CrimeCon is a happening. And I've never been to Nashville, but I understand it's a happening place too. So Trisha, be safe out there wherever you are. Before I get to Erica's question, I've seen several super chats go by, and I want to thank you all. Those of you who know, our moderator, Michelle, is going through some health problems right now. She's being treated for blood cancers, and she's about to get into the treatment with a vengeance. She's been sort of doing all of the pre-planning. And those of you who know her know that she's disabled, and so your generous donations really help her a lot. So I just want to say thank you. Everything that you send us in super chats or through our PayPal link goes directly to Michelle, and it just passes right through to her every month, and I appreciate it. I know she appreciates it more than you could ever know. Erica, would people believe the same thing if the cult was reptilians? Why should the law care about beliefs? Why don't we just focus on real evidence that is not subject to interpretation? Well, I think this is a good question, and I think we are to some extent. I don't think it matters whether this group is a cult or what they believe in if they are a cult. But I think the important thing that the defense is positing is that there are alternative explanations that don't involve Richard Allen. And you know, I mean, it's easy to pull up pie in the sky kinds of hard to believe excuses and pass them off as truth. But it doesn't appear that that's what's going on here. I don't think it matters one iota what if it is a cult or not a cult, or what kind of a cult. The only reason it matters is because this particular cult uses the symbols that were found at the crime scene. So that's important, because it's a little persuasive that maybe law enforcement didn't look hard enough at that theory. So the real evidence is that we now have law enforcement who initially said they'd consulted a professor who said it wasn't Odin symbols. We now have a professor who says that's not what I said. It most certainly is Odinist symbology. And we now have a connection with these cults somewhat in law enforcement, at least in prison guards. And so that makes you go, are they protecting somebody? Are they protecting their brother officers? It doesn't have to be anything as untoward as, oh, this was an initiation, or it was a sacrifice. It can just be as simple as they're connected, and that gives them a reason to protect the other people involved. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that it matters really what they believe. It matters that we can connect them. Hopefully that answered the question. I'm seeing some super chats come up. Thank you so very much. Hazelnut, thank you. Mary Miller Cruz, thank you. I'm trying to catch them as they come by. Michelle does a great job of keeping track of your donations, and we're trying really hard to recognize folks that donate once a month. So thank you so much, and look for your name in our monthly listener recognition. Thank you so much. Lisa Galindo, you are so generous, and we appreciate you so much. Thank you so much, Heard It on the X. We love this channel too. We try not to be dramatic. We try not to buy into any of the online stuff that's going on. We try really hard to give you the facts and my legal interpretation, my approach to what I think will be the outcome, or why I think it's an interesting issue to talk about. We didn't talk at all about Murdaugh tonight, but we will continue to be watching that as we go along, because I have some real questions. I have some real questions about the ethics of the court clerk. If a fraction of what she said, what is alleged, is true. But I also have some real questions about the ethics of Alec Murdaugh's lawyers. I've had those questions for a while, but they just keep sort of getting more intense. So, and it does make me wonder why Alec Murdaugh's lawyers keep sticking with him. It makes me wonder, what is it that he's got on them that keeps them coming back to do his bidding? So we'll keep up with that. For those of you who are really deeply interested in that case, y'all know Mandy Matney and True Sunlight, which used to be called the Murdaugh Murder Podcast, is on top of it. They also do a program called Cup of Justice that they do with Eric Bland, who is a South Carolina lawyer and has been involved in the case. And that is super interesting. And Mandy Matney's book is going to be on the shelf. It is out for pre-sales right now. It is called Blood on Their Hands. There is a link in our show notes if you would like to pre-order that book. I have pre-ordered mine and can't wait. So anybody else got more questions? Hi, Erica. This is also a good question. Are beliefs enough for probable cause for a police officer to issue a warrant? You're welcome for the previous answer. No, beliefs aren't enough. There has to be something else. There has to be some corroboration or some action or physical evidence that corroborates that police officer's belief. There's got to be more than just... Now, it doesn't have to be a lot because it's only probable cause. Probable cause is just there's probable cause to believe that a crime was committed and this person committed it. So it doesn't have to be a lot, but it does have to be more than just the officer's suspicion. A suspicion's not enough. So, for example, an officer can say, I suspect that that house down on that corner is a drug house. And I suspect that people are coming in and out of that drug house all the time. And I want a warrant. I want two warrants. I want a warrant to go in and search the house. And I want a warrant that to do some wiretaps. So a judge is going to say to the police officer, your gut suspicion that that house is a drug house isn't enough. I need something concrete. So then the police officer goes and stakes out the house and watches who goes in and out, and then goes to the judge and says, well, judge, this person who I know is a known drug user is going in and out of that house. Every other day, they go in and out of that house. I've been watching, and I know that known drug users often go in and out of residences frequently when they're buying drugs there. Now the judge says, okay, so we know we have a known drug user, somebody who's previously been convicted of possession of drugs, going in and out of a house, not just once, but multiple times in a fairly routine way that indicates that they're going there for a reason. Now that's probable cause. I'll give you the wiretap. So now he's got a wiretap. So now he can hear conversations going back and forth, and lo and behold, he hears drug deals go down. Now he's got enough to get a warrant to do the search. So the information does kind of build on itself, and officers do have to be able to articulate that, both verbally and in writing in the warrant, in the affidavit in support of the probable cause warrant. So yeah, mere suspicion isn't enough. Probable cause is a higher standard than a mere suspicion. Hi, Anne. Are you going to follow the Ruby and Jody story? Oh, I absolutely am going to follow the Ruby and Jody story. I absolutely have been following it along with the Tim Ballard story. The reason I've been following these cases is because my book has a great element of part of the issue in my book is the LDS Church. And Ruby and Jody, as well as Tim Ballard, those are all Mormon-related stories. So I'm really interested in those stories, and I absolutely will be continuing to follow Ruby and Jody. Yeah. I am listening to a lot of the podcasts that are out there about the cases, and keeping track of a lot of the information that's coming out on those cases. So as we know more about the legal part of it, as we know more about the prosecution, excuse me, I'm getting hiccups, I will definitely be addressing those. It is interesting. We have not seen, Josie, I'll get to yours in just a second. It is interesting that today we saw a little bit more information come out about Ruby's husband. I think his name is Kevin. And one of the things that happened was that the police broke in the door to do a search of Ruby's home, and so the door was kicked in, and then the older daughter went with the child welfare folks to the home and got things for the children, because the children, initially, the two children who were victimized were in state care, and the other children were with the sister. I'm hoping at this point that all the children have been sent to the sister and to family members. But that's typically what happens in child welfare cases, is that they attempt to place the children with family. So the sister went to the home. She's the older adult sister, went to the home to get things for the children. They needed clothes, and so she went to get things so that the kids could stay with her. And the father is now insisting that the police charge her with burglary for having gone in the house and taken things. So it's a tangled web. And, initially everybody was saying, the dad wasn't really that involved, and he was, kind of shoved to the side. But I don't know, there's something that doesn't set right with me with that. So it'll be interesting to see as time goes on where the investigation goes and how much culpability he has as well. Josie Rose, I am not familiar with this case, Jonathan Quiles or Quillis. So I'll have to check that one out. One that I am very interested in following is Jonathan, get so I can't write and talk at the same time. Used to be able to. I'm out of practice. But one thing that I did see is that for those of you who followed Ethan Crumley, he was a high school shooter, mass shooter. And he is the one whose parents have been prosecuted for providing him with a gun and not recognizing his pretty serious mental health issues. And they're getting ready to go to trial. And that is going to be a really interesting trial because it is a really novel prosecution. It hasn't been done before. In the law, we call that a case of first impression. Prosecuting the parents for the actions of their child hasn't been done before. So it'll be really interesting to see how that one comes out. I am going to be following that one very closely. So LA says she's got questions about Timothy Ferriton once I have a chance to catch up on those. So I will get up to speed on those for next week, and we can talk about them next week. And any other questions about what we've talked about today? We're coming up on the 2-hour mark, and I want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks again for your really generous donations for Michelle. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending your Wednesday evening with us. I know there's lots of other things you could be doing besides hanging out with me. We've got 288 people in the chat tonight. We've had as many as 1,000, so but I'm always glad for the faithful folks who show up and join us every week. Please subscribe if you haven't. Hit the like button because that helps us move up in the algorithm. Good Lori watches Tim Ferriton trial. Question: similarities in religion and extreme abusive parenting. Okay, well, I'm going to check that one out because it sounds to me like one that we need to take a look at. Sounds to me like it's got some parallels to maybe to our Munchausen cases and maybe to the Jody and Ruby case. So I'm on it. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. I'm driving to Portland for the weekend. That's about 6 hours from here. So I'm going over for a memorial service for an old friend. And so I'll be on the road tomorrow and back on Saturday. You guys have a great weekend. Enjoy all that lovely Indian summertime. It's my favorite time of year. And enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you back here next Wednesday. In the meantime, if you have questions we didn't answer, post them below. If you have cases that you would like me to take a look at, let me know. You can do it by email or you can post them in the comments below. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to say good night. Have a great weekend.